I observed the human long before he became relevant. From the upper gallery of the command sanctum, I watched him move through the wounded corridors of my flagship Valeth Prime, a structure grown, not built, sung into existence by architects who no longer breathe. The ship had been alive when his species still struggled to name fire. Now it lay quiet, humiliated by damage inflicted not by war, but by neglect. A failure of foresight. A failure of mine. The human did not know this history. He could not feel the ache in the walls or hear the slow grief vibrating through the hull. And yet, strangely, he paused where others would not. He rested his hand against the inner membrane of the engine chamber, as if listening to something beyond sound. That was the first anomaly. Humans are loud creatures, emotionally, biologically, culturally. Their kind fills space with urgency, with assertion. They conquer silence rather than endure it. Yet this one worked without speech, without the frantic gestures common to his engineers. He studied. He waited. He adjusted his breathing to the ship's failing rhythm, not the other way around. I am Queen Erilyn of the 13th Spiral, sovereign of a dominion that governs 11 systems and influences 40 more. I have overseen the rise and extinction of civilizations. I have ordered fleets to burn suns when diplomacy failed. I have watched entire species kneel, not out of fear, but out of recognition. I do not watch individuals. And yet I watched him. The Council had objected to allowing a human aboard the Valeth Prime. Their reasoning was predictable: contamination, unpredictability, symbolic weakness. To rely on a human technician, even temporarily, was seen as an erosion of authority. A queen does not invite lesser species to touch the heart of her power. But the Council does not feel the ship dying beneath their feet. I overruled them. The human's designation was simple: a mechanic. An engineer. No noble lineage. No enhanced physiology. No diplomatic significance. He came from a border colony that barely registered on our stellar charts, a place where survival depended on repairing what should have been discarded. That, too, was an anomaly. He did not treat my presence with reverence when we first encountered each other. Nor with disrespect. He acknowledged me as one acknowledges gravity, something vast, undeniable, but not personal. He did not avert his eyes in submission, nor did he hold them in defiance. He simply looked, assessed, and returned his attention to the failing conduit at his feet. Many have died for less. Your ship is still listening, he said then, without preamble. The translation lattice hesitated before delivering his words, as if uncertain they deserved to exist. I asked him what he meant. He explained, not in metaphors of war or ownership, but in terms of fatigue. Of systems pushed beyond their intended harmony. Of a living structure that had been commanded too often and rested too little. His voice carried no accusation, only observation. As though the fault belonged not to me, but to time itself. I should have dismissed him. Instead, I authorized full access. Over the following cycles, I observed patterns. The ship responded to his presence in ways it had not responded to my own engineers. Power fluctuations stabilized. Internal resonance corrected itself. Minor systems reactivated without command, like muscles remembering forgotten movements. The human never celebrated these successes. He never claimed credit. When praised by my technicians, he deflected with quiet discomfort, redirecting attention back to the ship, as if the vessel were the true subject of admiration. This was unsettling. Authority, in my experience, is claimed or enforced. Humans, especially, crave recognition. They build monuments to themselves before they build understanding. Yet this one seemed almost uncomfortable being noticed. I began requesting status updates personally. Not because they were necessary, but because they were honest. He spoke to me without ornamentation. When something could not be repaired, he said so. When my expectations exceeded reality, he corrected them. No fear entered his tone. No ambition colored his words. It occurred to me, then, that humans are often dangerous not because of their aggression, but because of their refusal to know their place. This one, however, knew exactly where he stood. And still, he did not kneel. During one observation cycle, the ship entered a controlled shutdown, a test of the repairs. Silence spread through the hull, deep and total. Even my guards shifted uneasily. For my species, silence is not absence, it is judgment. The human removed his gloves and sat on the deck, back against the core housing. He closed his eyes. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Waiting," he replied. "If it comes back on its own, we did it right. No command. No override. No force." The ship reawakened slowly, like a sleeper deciding to rise rather than being shaken awake. Lights returned in waves. Energy flows stabilized. For the first time since the damage, Valeth Prime did not scream when it breathed. I felt something then, an unfamiliar pressure, not unlike pride, but lacking its sharpness. It was quieter. Heavier. Recognition. I dismissed the guards. I ordered the council feed muted. Alone with the human and the ship, I studied him more carefully. The asymmetry of his face. The scars on his hands, earned, not ceremonial. The way his posture suggested endurance rather than dominance. "You are aware," I said, "that your presence here will be recorded?" He nodded. "Everything important usually is. You may be judged for this." He considered that. "Then judge me for fixing it," he said. "Not for who I am." In all my centuries, no subject had ever spoken those words to me without trembling. I realized, with unsettling clarity, that this human was not repairing my ship alone. He was exposing a fracture in the way I ruled. And the galaxy, vast and patient, was watching, whether it knew it yet or not. The council convened without my request. That alone was an insult. Their projections filled the circular chamber. Fractals of light forming faces too disciplined to show fear, too political to show honesty. They spoke in layered caution, in probability curves and precedent. The humans' continued presence aboard Valeth Prime, they argued, was no longer a technical matter. It had become symbolic. Symbols, to empires, are more dangerous than weapons. They reminded me, politely, persistently, that humans occupied the lowest tier of interstellar relevance. Short-lived. Emotion-driven. Inconsistent. Useful as labor, tolerable as traders, unacceptable as intimates of power. A queen's flagship was not merely transport, it was ritual, legacy, and warning. Allowing a human unrestricted access to its core was, in their view, a fracture in the story we told the galaxy about ourselves. They were not wrong. But they were incomplete. I listened without interruption, my attention divided between their arguments and the faint hum of the ship beneath my feet. The Valeth Prime was stronger now, still scarred, but no longer fading. Its systems resonated in patterns I had not felt since my ascension. It was as if the vessel remembered what it had once been, and chose to return. Choice. That word followed me long after the council's voices faded. I found the human in the tertiary engineering bay, disassembled components arranged around him with deliberate care. He worked as though interruption were an expected state of existence, not an annoyance. When he noticed my presence, he did not rise immediately. He finished tightening a connector first. Only then did he turn. "You're thinking too loudly," he said. I should have reprimanded him. Instead, I asked how he knew. He gestured vaguely toward the walls. "The ship's tense. Happens when decisions are being argued somewhere important. You speak as though it understands politics. It understands strain," he replied. "Same thing, most of the time." I informed him that his access might soon be revoked. He accepted this without protest. No bargaining. No attempt to justify his value. He merely nodded and began cataloging tools for return. This, too, disturbed me. "You do not object?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not my ship. Not my call." Centuries of rule had trained me to recognize deception, manipulation, ambition disguised as humility. Yet there was none of that in him. His detachment was not indifference, it was respect for boundaries. Something my own species often forgot once power was attained. I asked him why he agreed to repair the ship in the first place. He paused, hands still. Because it was hurting, he said simply. That answer offered no strategic advantage. No promise of reward. It did not even reference me. Later, alone in my private observatory, I reviewed historical records, treaties with humans, conflicts, failed alliances. Patterns emerged quickly. Humans adapt where others dominate. They fix what they cannot replace. They endure what they cannot escape. Their civilizations collapse often, but they rebuild faster each time. They are not powerful. They are resilient. The galaxy respects power. It rarely anticipates resilience. The next cycle, the ship suffered an unexpected resonance collapse, a secondary system failure that should not have occurred. My engineers responded with protocol, isolating sectors, initiating overrides. The human ignored them. He crossed the safety threshold and manually stabilized the feedback loop, exposing himself to lethal energy discharge. Alarms screamed. Guards moved to restrain him. Don't, he said, calm, focused. You'll make it panic. I ordered them to stand down. Minutes stretched into something fragile. The human's hand shook, not from fear, but from effort. Sweat traced paths through the grime on his skin. He murmured adjustments under his breath, not to the ship, but with it, as though negotiating rather than commanding. The system stabilized. He collapsed to one knee afterward, breathing hard. Still alive. Barely. My chief engineer protested, citing procedure violations, risk assessments, chain of command. I dismissed them all. For the first time since my coronation, I felt anger, not as a weapon, but as defense. Not of my authority. Of him. That realization unsettled me more than the system failure. I summoned the human to my private chamber, an unprecedented breach of protocol. He arrived cleaned, repaired uniform ill-fitting against royal architecture. He stood where indicated, posture respectful but unbowed. You endangered yourself, I said. Yes, he replied. Why? Because the ship didn't have time for permission. No subject had ever prioritized my possession over my consent. I asked him if he understood the consequences of his actions. That the council would see defiance. That my rivals would see weakness. That the galaxy would interpret compassion as fracture. He considered this carefully. Then maybe the galaxy's been reading the wrong signals. Silence followed, dense, evaluative. You are aware, I said slowly, that humans are not considered equals. He met my gaze fully then. Not challengingly. Honestly. I know, he said. I didn't ask to be. That answer echoed long after he was dismissed. That night, I dreamed, not of conquest, nor legacy, nor the endless spiral of rule. I dreamed of standing at the edge of a failing system, watching someone repair what I could only command. Dreams, for my kind, are rare. They are considered inefficiencies of the mind. I woke with a decision forming, slow, inevitable, dangerous. The council would force a choice. The galaxy would witness it. And the human, unaware of the scale of consequence orbiting him, continued to work, quietly reshaping not just a ship, but the trajectory of an empire that had forgotten how to listen. The shock had not yet come. But it was approaching. The council's ultimatum arrived wrapped in ceremony. It always does. They did not threaten me outright. That would have been foolish. Instead, they invoked tradition, lineage, probability. They reminded me that queens are not solitary figures but living symbols, their choices absorbed into the identity of the empire itself. A ruler's private decisions, they insisted, do not remain private for long. Especially not this one. The human's work was nearly complete. Valeth Prime no longer limped between stars, it moved with a steadiness that bordered on grace. Systems sang in alignment. Even the ancient core, older than most of the council members combined, responded with a depth of resonance that suggested approval. Approval. A dangerous concept. I was summoned to witness the final synchronization. Protocol demanded it. Symbolism demanded it. And perhaps, though I would not yet admit this to myself, something else demanded it as well. The human stood at the heart of the engine chamber, surrounded by living conduits pulsing softly with light. He looked smaller there than anywhere else aboard the ship, not because the space diminished him, but because it refused to frame him as important. He noticed me immediately. "Timing's good," he said. "One more adjustment." I watched in silence as he calibrated the final sequence. My guards remained at a distance, uneasy. They had grown accustomed to his presence, but not to their own reaction to it. He was an anomaly they could not categorize, and thus could not fully distrust. When the synchronization completed, the ship exhaled. That is the only word that fits. A release of tension passed through the hull, subtle but unmistakable. Lights settled into stable patterns. The constant background strain, the thing I had lived with for cycles without realizing it, was gone. "It's done," the human said. I should have thanked him formally. I should have dismissed him, rewarded him, returned him to the obscurity from which he came. That was the clean ending. The safe ending. Instead, I asked him a question no queen should ever ask a subject. "What do you want?" He looked genuinely surprised. "For fixing the ship," I clarified. He hesitated, not out of calculation, but discomfort. "I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't think that far ahead." This, from a species accused of impulsiveness. I offered him credits. He declined. I offered him transport anywhere in the map systems. He declined. I offered him protection under my banner. He considered that longer, but still declined. "I don't belong under banners," he said quietly. "They tend to turn people into things." That answer should have angered me. It did not. "What would you choose?" I pressed. "If consequence were irrelevant?" He looked around the chamber, not at the technology, not at the guards, but at the ship itself. He rested a hand against the living wall, the same gesture I had observed cycles earlier. "I'd stay," he said. "For a while. Make sure it holds." The simplicity of that desire unsettled me more than ambition ever could. Empires are built by those who want more. They are undone by those who want enough. The council moved faster than I expected. Within one cycle, they announced my betrothal. Not to the human, of course. To a sovereign of the Ninth Dominion, an alliance forged to stabilize trade routes and deter expansionist rivals. The match was logical, beneficial, entirely devoid of choice. They informed me, rather than asked. I did not object immediately. That, too, was noticed. That night, I walked the upper observation decks alone. Stars drifted past in silent procession, indifferent to politics, indifferent to vows. I had ruled for centuries without longing. Desire was a distraction. Attachment, a liability. So why did the thought of sending the human away feel like amputation? I found him in a maintenance corridor, seated on the floor, back against a panel he had repaired earlier. He was reviewing diagnostics on a handheld device, brow furrowed in concentration. "They're sending you home," I said. He absorbed this without visible reaction. "Figured," he replied. "Ship's stable now. There will be compensation," I added. "More than your colony has seen in generations." He nodded. "Good. They could use it." No resentment. No appeal. I should have ended the conversation there. Instead, I told him about the betrothal. That was my first true betrayal of protocol. He looked up then, really looked at me. Not as a queen. Not as a symbol. As a being facing an imposed future. "I'm guessing you didn't choose it," he said. "No," I replied. He was silent for a long moment. Then, "Do you want it?" The question struck harder than any challenge ever had. Want. Queens are trained to answer questions of necessity, not desire. Want is a human word, inefficient, dangerous, destabilizing. "I don't know," I said. He considered that carefully. "Then that's your answer." I told him the galaxy would not understand. That my authority would fracture. That alliances would fail. That wars might follow. He listened without interruption. Finally, he said, Then they'll adjust. Or they won't. But at least the choice would be real. I laughed then, a sound so rare my own guards would not have recognized it. You speak as though you are unaffected. He smiled faintly. Oh, I'm affected. Just, not in the ways that matter to empires. Silence returned, heavier now. He stood, brushed metal dust from his hands, and met my gaze. There was something different in his expression, not hope, not fear, but resolve. Look, he said awkwardly. I don't know how your people do things. And I'm definitely not important enough to pretend this makes sense. But where I'm from, when something matters, when someone matters, you say it. Even if it's stupid. He took a breath. Marry me, he said. No title. No flourish. No submission. Just a human, standing in the corridor of an alien queen's flagship, making a request that should have ended his life. The ship did not react. The guards did not move. The galaxy did not yet know it had tilted. I felt the weight of centuries press against a single moment, tradition against truth, stability against sincerity. The Council's voices echoed in my memory. The alliances, the wars avoided and the wars yet to come. And beneath it all, a simpler realization formed, quiet, undeniable. No one had ever asked me to choose before. I did not answer him then. But in the silence that followed, the empire I had ruled so flawlessly began, for the first time, to change direction. I did not answer him immediately. Not because I was uncertain, but because certainty, once spoken, cannot be reclaimed. The corridor felt suddenly small, as though the ship itself were listening more closely than before. The human stood without expectation, without performance. He had made no attempt to justify his worth, no promise of alliance or stability. He did not kneel. He did not reach for me. He simply waited. That, I realized, was the most dangerous thing he could have done. I dismissed the guards with a gesture that brooked no interpretation. Their hesitation lasted a fraction of a second too long, long enough for history to notice, but they obeyed. The corridor emptied, leaving only the low hum of the Valeth Prime and the space between us. You understand, I said, what you are asking? He nodded. Enough to know it's probably a bad idea. For you, it would mean abandoning your world. I've done that before. For me, it would mean dismantling centuries of structure. He considered this. Structures that can't survive a choice usually shouldn't. I studied him then, not as a queen assessing a subject, but as a being evaluating another being's gravity. He was not fearless. I could see the strain in his posture, the careful stillness of someone braced for consequence. Courage, I had learned, was not the absence of fear but the refusal to let it decide. Why me? I asked at last. He exhaled slowly, as though relieved I had not dismissed the question as sentimental. Because you listen, he said. Because you carry the weight without pretending it doesn't hurt. And because you don't need me, but you didn't send me away. No one had ever described me that way. In the silence that followed, something within me aligned, not ambition, not rebellion, but clarity. I saw the empire as it was, vast, efficient, brittle. Built on inevitability rather than consent. Strong, yes, but strength that could not bend had begun to crack. I had repaired worlds with fleets. This human had repaired one ship by listening. Very well, I said. The word carried more mass than any decree I had ever issued. His eyes widened, not in triumph, but disbelief. You accept? He asked carefully. I choose, I corrected. The distinction mattered. The announcement was not immediate. I did not grant the council the comfort of preparation. Instead, I summoned them to the Grand Convergence Hall under the pretense of finalizing the betrothal. Representatives from allied dominions attended via projection. Observers tuned in quietly. The galaxy, always alert to shifts in power, leaned closer. I stood alone at the center of the chamber, no consort, no banners lowered, no symbols softened. I have heard your counsel, I began. I have reviewed tradition, probability, and outcome. And I have decided. A pause, calculated, deliberate. I will not proceed with the proposed alliance. The chamber erupted, controlled outrage, fractured disbelief. Before it could congeal into resistance, I continued. I will instead formalize a union of my own choosing. Not as a concession. Not as weakness. But as declaration. I gestured, and the human stepped forward. The silence that followed was not empty. It was seismic. Objections came swiftly, legal challenges, accusations of destabilization, veiled threats of secession. I allowed them to speak until they exhausted themselves. Then I did something no queen before me had ever done. I told the truth. I spoke of the ship, how it had been dying while we debated optics. I spoke of resilience mistaken for insignificance. I spoke of the danger of an empire that only listened to itself. I did not defend the human as an equal. I defended him as necessary. This union, I concluded, does not diminish our power. It exposes a blindness we can no longer afford. Some systems withdrew support immediately. Others hesitated. A few, fewer than I expected, expressed approval. The shock rippled outward. Markets destabilized. Alliances recalculated. Rivals paused, uncertain whether this was fracture or evolution. And throughout it all, the human remained beside me, not as shield, not as symbol, but as presence. In the cycles that followed, challenges arose. Assassination attempts, predictable, ineffective. Political sabotage, more subtle, less so. Each time, I responded not with annihilation, but recalibration. Where once I would have burned dissent away, I now addressed its cause. The empire did not collapse. It adapted. The human did not become a ruler. He refused titles, declined authority beyond what was necessary. He continued to repair, not just ships, but systems overlooked by those who governed from distance. When asked how he intended to advise a queen, he answered simply, I won't. I'll remind her when things stop making sense. And he did. Privately, our union was quieter than the galaxy imagined. There were no grand rituals beyond what was required. No attempt to reshape him into something symbolic. We spoke often, not of destiny, but of balance. Of what must be held, and what must be allowed to change. Once, as we watched a new generation of vessels depart the shipyards, designed with resilience rather than dominance in mind, I asked him if he regretted asking. He smiled faintly. Sometimes, he admitted. But only when I remember how easy it would have been to stay silent. The galaxy never fully stopped talking about the choice that shocked it. Historians debated it. Strategists misread it. Poets exaggerated it. But the truth was simpler than legend allowed. An empire survived not because its queen chose a human, but because she chose to listen. And the human who repaired her ship did not marry a queen to gain a galaxy. He married one who finally allowed herself to choose within it. That was the shockwave. Not the union. The awakening.